Beneath the low, copper-colored clouds of Terra Nova 9, the landscape stretched out in endless jagged plains, broken only by distant mesas and the occasional glimmer of metallic mining outposts. Gabe Marshall leaned back in the driver's seat of his battered cargo hauler, humming softly to himself as the vehicle rumbled across the uneven terrain. He liked the quiet on these solo runs. No chatter, no orders to follow, just the low hum of the engine and the empty horizon. The job was simple enough: deliver a few crates of mineral samples to a nearby outpost before the storm season hit. On Terra Nova 9, storms were like clockwork, arriving in sudden bursts of violent wind and torrential rain that could drown an entire plain in minutes. Gabe had seen it happen more than once and wasn't keen to stick around if another squall was brewing. He glanced at the skies, noting the heavy clouds thickening. "Looks like I'm cutting it close," he muttered. Just as he reached for his communicator to check the weather updates, something caught his eye: a flicker of movement near the riverbank to his right. He squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There, in the midst of the rising waters of the river swollen by recent rains, something thrashed violently. At first, Gabe thought it was some local wildlife caught in the current. Terra Nova 9 was home to plenty of strange creatures, most of them small, rodent-like things that scurried away the moment a human appeared. But this was different. Larger. More graceful, despite its struggle. He brought the hauler to a halt, his curiosity getting the better of him. Jumping out, Gabe jogged over to the riverbank, rain beginning to mist down in light droplets. His boots squelched in the mud as he approached the water's edge, his heart pounding with an uneasy mixture of adrenaline and uncertainty. The creature in the river was unlike anything Gabe had ever seen. It looked like a leopard, but its body was sleek and muscular, with shimmering black fur that seemed to ripple with an iridescent sheen. Even from a distance, he could see its eyes, large, violet, and glowing faintly, even in the dim light of the storm. The leopard's long limbs kicked out against the powerful current, trying to claw its way to the shore but failing, dragged deeper with each passing second. Gabe stood frozen for a moment, instinctively wary. But then the creature let out a sound, not a growl or a roar, but a sharp, almost desperate cry. Gabe's heart lurched. He wasn't one to walk away from something in need, even if he didn't fully understand what that something was. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, before sprinting forward. The river was freezing, far colder than he expected, as he plunged into the waist-high water. The current pulled at him immediately, threatening to sweep him away, but Gabe dug his feet into the soft mud beneath him and pushed forward. The leopard thrashed wildly just a few feet away, its slick fur making it hard to grab hold of. "Easy, easy," Gabe grunted, his hands finally locking around the creature's flank. Its muscles tensed beneath his grip, but he didn't let go. With a heave, he hauled the alien leopard toward the shore, every step a battle against the swirling current and his own exhaustion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stumbled onto dry land. Gabe collapsed to the ground, panting heavily, his soaked clothes clinging to his skin. The creature lay beside him, breathing hard but alive. Its violet eyes blinked slowly, glancing at Gabe with something that looked almost like gratitude. Gabe sat up, his chest heaving as he studied the animal. Up close, it was even more striking. Its fur wasn't just black, it had an almost liquid quality, like the night sky reflecting starlight. Thin lines of silver shimmered across its coat, flickering as if they were alive, constantly shifting beneath the surface. "Well, aren't you a piece of work?" Gabe said, shaking his head in disbelief. He wasn't sure what he had just pulled from that river, but it was no ordinary animal. He glanced around warily. Terra Nova 9 wasn't exactly known for its exotic fauna, especially not creatures like this. Whatever it wasn't native to this planet. He reached out cautiously, placing his hand on the creature's side, half expecting it to lash out. But the leopard remained still, its violet eyes tracking him quietly. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally cold, as if it had been submerged in ice water for hours. "You all right?" Gabe asked, feeling silly for talking to an alien leopard but unable to help himself. The creature gave a low, soft growl in response, but it wasn't threatening. More like an acknowledgement. Gabe wasn't sure if it understood him, but something about the interaction felt intelligent. Then, the rain picked up again, harder this time, accompanied by the distant rumble of thunder. Gabe glanced up, his heart sinking. The storm was coming, and fast. He needed to get to shelter. He stood, looking down at the creature once more. "Come on," he muttered, bending down to lift it. The leopard was heavier than he expected, but Gabe managed to hoist it into his arms, cradling it awkwardly as he carried it toward his cargo hauler. He placed the creature gently in the back, unsure of what else to do. As he climbed into the driver's seat, his mind raced with questions. What the hell was this thing? And why was it here? He glanced back at the leopard, its glowing violet eyes watching him through the dim interior of the hauler. A shiver ran down his spine, but not from the cold. There was something unsettling about those eyes. Something more than animal instinct. As the rain began to pour in earnest, Gabe gunned the engine, steering the hauler toward the nearest outpost. Whatever he had just saved, it wasn't just some lost alien wildlife. And, as the storm raged outside, Gabe couldn't shake the feeling that someone was hunting it. The storm battered against the cargo hauler, sheets of rain cascading down the windshield in blinding torrents. Gabe's hands gripped the wheel tightly as he navigated the treacherous terrain. The muddy ground beneath the hauler's heavy tires was barely holding, and the once visible plains had transformed into a dark blur. The storm's fury was in full force, but Gabe's thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on the creature lying in the back of the vehicle. Every few minutes, he glanced into the rearview mirror, checking on the alien leopard. It hadn't moved much since he'd dragged it out of the river, but there was a distinct change happening. Its obsidian fur, once sleek and shimmering with those strange silver streaks, was dulling. Worse, its body was twitching, as though fighting something inside itself. Gabe didn't know what to make of it. He had seen some odd things on Terra Nova 9, but this was different. There was a feeling in the air, an unsettling sense that he had just stumbled into something far beyond his understanding. Something dangerous. The leopard let out a low, almost painful growl, stirring in the back. Gabe watched as its body convulsed once, twice, then stilled again. He swallowed hard, unsure what was happening. Was it injured? Sick? Or was this some kind of metamorphosis? The thought sent a chill down his spine. Terra Nova 9 wasn't known for shapeshifters or any species with that kind of ability, but this wasn't a normal planet, and whatever this thing was, it wasn't native. Just as the thought crossed his mind, Gabe noticed it. The leopard's fur was changing rapidly now. The once shimmering black coat began to lose its luster, turning pale, almost translucent. Gabe's heart pounded in his chest. What the hell was going on? Suddenly, the creature shuddered violently, its form twisting in a way that made Gabe's skin crawl. He slammed the brakes, bringing the hauler to a skidding halt on the muddy road. The storm continued to rage outside, but Gabe's focus was entirely on what was happening in the back of his vehicle. He unbuckled and turned around in his seat, his pulse racing. The leopard was no longer recognizable. Its body was shifting, shrinking. The sleek, feline form was dissolving into something else entirely. Bones cracked and reshaped, limbs elongated, and fur receded until it was replaced by pale, smooth skin. Gabe's breath caught in his throat as the transformation completed. Lying where the leopard had been moments ago was a humanoid figure, curled up in the fetal position, shivering violently. For a moment, Gabe was frozen in place, staring in shock at the figure before him. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. The being's skin was pale, almost translucent, with faint, glowing lines running along its arms and legs, similar to the silver streaks he had seen in the leopard's fur. Its eyes, still those same violet, glowing eyes, blinked slowly, as though struggling to adjust to its new form. Gabe's mind raced. He had just saved an alien shapeshifter. A real, living shapeshifter. The implications were enormous, but there was no time to think about that now. The figure stirred, its body trembling as it slowly sat up. It looked around, confused, disoriented. Its eyes locked onto Gabe's, and for a brief moment, they held each other's gaze. The being's expression was one of fear, but there was also something else, something Gabe hadn't expected. Relief. "You saved me," the figure said, its voice soft but clear, echoing strangely in the enclosed space of the hauler. Gabe blinked, unable to find the words at first. Yeah," he stammered. "I guess I did." The being's eyes fluttered shut briefly, as if trying to gather strength. When they reopened, it spoke again, more steadily this time. "I am Anari. My form, it is not stable. I needed to escape, but the river, it caught me off guard." Gabe swallowed hard, still trying to process everything. Escape? From what? Anari's gaze flicked toward the storm outside, and her body tensed. From them. They're coming. Gabe's stomach tightened at the cryptic response. Who's coming? What's going on here? Anari struggled to sit up further, wincing as she did. They were hunting me. I carry something dangerous. I was fleeing when the storm hit. Gabe's brow furrowed in confusion. Dangerous? What do you mean? Before Anari could answer, a low, mechanical hum cut through the sound of the storm. Gabe's eyes widened in alarm as he recognized the sound hovercrafts. He whipped his head around, staring out the windshield into the storm. Through the sheets of rain, he could just make out the faint lights of several approaching ships, hovering low to the ground, moving fast. Anari's voice trembled. They found me. Panic surged through Gabe's chest. He had been caught in crossfire before, but something about this felt different, more deliberate. Whoever was in those ships wasn't just out for a random chase. They were here for Anari, and they were closing in fast. Gabe swore under his breath and slammed the hauler back into gear. The vehicle lurched forward, tires spinning in the mud as he gunned it down the makeshift road. The hovercrafts followed, their lights piercing through the rain, cutting closer with each passing second. Who the hell are they? Gabe shouted over the roar of the engine and the storm. Anari's voice was strained, weak from her recent transformation. They work for the Council, the Interstellar Authority. I stole something from them. They'll stop at nothing to retrieve it. Gabe's mind raced. You stole something? What? Anari's eyes flickered, glowing dimly in the darkness of the hauler. It's inside me. A weapon. A weapon? Gabe's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just some alien fugitive, she was carrying something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The hovercrafts gained on them, and Gabe could hear the sharp hiss of laser cannons charging up. Without warning, a barrage of energy bolts slammed into the road ahead, sending mud and debris flying into the air. Gabe swerved, barely avoiding the blast, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Hold on, he shouted, slamming his foot down on the accelerator. The hauler roared forward, but the hovercrafts were relentless. They circled around, cutting off any chance of escape. Gabe's pulse quickened, sweat mixing with the rain that had seeped into the vehicle. There was no way out. No way to outrun them. And then, Anari did something unexpected. She raised her hand, and the air around them seemed to shimmer. The lines on her body began to glow brighter, pulsing with a strange, ethereal energy. Gabe felt a pressure in his chest, like the air itself had thickened. With a flick of her wrist, Anari sent a wave of energy outward. The hovercraft shuddered, their engines sputtering as if struck by some invisible force. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, one by one, the ships faltered, losing control. They spun wildly, crashing into the ground with deafening explosions. Gabe stared in stunned silence. He didn't know what kind of power Anari had just unleashed, but it was enough to take out an entire squadron of ships. Anari collapsed back into the seat, her energy spent. We don't have much time, she gasped. There will be more. Gabe didn't need to be told twice. He pushed the hauler harder, tearing through the storm, his heart pounding in his chest. Whoever this alien was, whatever weapon she was carrying, it was worth risking everything to protect her. But as they sped away into the dark, stormy night, one question gnawed at Gabe's mind. What kind of weapon was she hiding? The road ahead was a blur of mud and rain, the landscape swallowed by the storm's fury. Gabe's heart pounded as he pushed the cargo hauler to its limits, the vehicle bouncing over the rough terrain as the sound of distant hovercraft engines rumbled behind them. His mind raced, trying to piece together everything that had happened in the last few hours. An alien shapeshifter. Anari. A stolen weapon hidden inside her. And now, the relentless hunters closing in on them. Gabe glanced back at Anari. She was slumped against the wall of the hauler's interior, her pale form barely holding together after the energy she had unleashed moments earlier. Her violet eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly as they locked with Gabe's for just a second. "They'll be back," she whispered, her voice weak but urgent. That was just the first wave. Gabe clenched his jaw. He knew she was right. The hovercrafts that had been taken down in the explosion wouldn't be the end of it. The council, whoever they were, wanted Anari, and they wanted her badly. There would be more coming, and Gabe wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running. "What are we supposed to do?" he muttered, more to himself than to Anari. "This thing inside you, it's got them sending out the whole damn fleet. I can't outrun them forever." Anari struggled to sit up, her breath shallow. "There's a place," she said, her voice strained. "A sanctuary. We can hide there. If we make it in time." Gabe narrowed his eyes. "Sanctuary? Where?" "About 200 kilometers north of here," she said, wincing as she tried to shift into a more comfortable position. "An old research station, abandoned now. It's shielded from detection. They won't find us there." Gabe let out a sharp breath, glancing at the navigation panel on his console. 200 kilometers in this storm, with hunters on their tail, it was a suicide mission. But there weren't any other options. They couldn't stay out in the open, not when the enemy could track them so easily. "All right," Gabe said, his voice grim. "Hold on. I'll get us there." He punched in the coordinates and gunned the hauler forward, its engine growling as it tore through the muddy terrain. The storm's intensity grew with every passing minute, the rain turning into a deluge, the wind howling like a beast unleashed. But Gabe's focus was laser-sharp, his hands gripping the controls with fierce determination. Anari's breathing slowed as she drifted in and out of consciousness, her energy clearly spent. Gabe couldn't imagine what kind of power it took to take down those ships, but it had drained her completely. He cast a worried glance at her pale form, unsure how much more she could handle. Suddenly, the hauler's radar pinged. Gabe's heart sank. More hovercrafts. Several of them, closing in fast. "They're here," Gabe muttered, his pulse quickening. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. He could hear the distinct whine of their engines, even over the roar of the storm. Without warning, a laser blast hit the ground just meters from the hauler, sending mud and debris flying into the air. Gabe swerved hard, narrowly avoiding a direct hit as he struggled to keep the vehicle on course. The hovercraft swooped down low, their dark, sleek forms cutting through the storm like predators honing in on prey. Anari stirred at the sound of the blasts, her eyes blinking open. We can't fight them," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Not like this." "I'm not planning on fighting them," Gabe shouted, swerving again as another barrage of laser fire lit up the sky. "But I'm not giving you up either." His mind raced, looking for an advantage. The terrain was rough, with craggy hills and rocky outcroppings dotting the landscape. The hovercrafts had the speed and the firepower, but the hauler had heavy armor. If he could just get them to the canyon up ahead, maybe he could use the narrow passages to his advantage. A third volley hit the ground just in front of them, and the hauler bucked violently as the shockwave rippled through the mud. Gabe gritted his teeth, slamming the vehicle into a hard left turn as they sped toward the canyon. Come on, he muttered under his breath, his heart racing. He could see the narrow entrance to the canyon up ahead, its jagged cliffs rising like sentinels on either side. If they could make it inside, the hovercrafts wouldn't be able to follow as easily. The hovercrafts descended, their weapons glowing as they prepared for another strike. Gabe felt his pulse quicken. One more hit and the hauler wouldn't make it. Just as the lasers fired, Gabe veered the hauler sharply into the mouth of the canyon. The energy blasts struck the cliffside, sending rocks crashing down behind them, blocking the hovercraft's direct path. Gabe didn't slow down. He pushed the hauler harder, maneuvering through the narrow, winding passage as the craft struggled to follow from above. They can't get a clear shot in here, Gabe muttered, adrenaline surging through him. But it's a dead end unless we find a way out fast. Anari, her strength slowly returning, pushed herself up enough to look out the window. There's a cave system ahead, she said, her voice weak but urgent. If we can get underground, they won't be able to track us. Gabe glanced at the canyon walls towering above them. Cave system? How far? Just a few kilometers, Anari replied, wincing in pain. But it's dangerous. The terrain is unstable. Better than being blown to pieces, Gabe muttered, scanning the landscape ahead. He could hear the hovercrafts circling above the canyon, their engines whining as they searched for a way in. The narrow passage had bought them some time, but it wouldn't last long. They rounded a bend, and Gabe spotted the entrance to the cave system, a dark, yawning hole at the base of the cliffs, half hidden by debris and jagged rocks. The ground around it looked treacherous, with loose stones and steep drops that could easily send the hauler tumbling if he wasn't careful. Hang on, Gabe called out, steering the vehicle toward the cave. The hauler skidded and bumped over the rough terrain, the tires struggling to find grip on the slick ground. Rocks shifted beneath them, and for a terrifying moment, Gabe thought the whole vehicle would tip over. But somehow, they made it. The hauler lurched into the mouth of the cave, its headlights cutting through the darkness as the walls closed in around them. The sound of the hovercrafts faded, drowned out by the thick stone above. Gabe brought the hauler to a halt, his heart pounding in his chest. The sudden silence was deafening after the chaos of the pursuit. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the steady drip of water from the cave roof and the distant rumble of the storm outside. Gabe turned to Anari. She was breathing heavily, her skin pale and translucent, but she managed a small, weary smile. We're safe. For now, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But they'll keep searching. They always do. Gabe leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. We'll deal with them when the time comes. Right now, we need to figure out what's going on. What's inside you that's got them so desperate? Anari's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep sorrow. The weapon, she said softly, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It's not just any weapon. It's a biological entity, something created to destroy entire species. And now, it's inside me. Gabe stared at her, his heart sinking. He had known it was bad, but not like this. What are we supposed to do with something like that? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anari looked at him, her eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted. But we can't let them have it. If they get their hands on me, they'll use it to wipe out entire civilizations. Gabe felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes had just been raised to an unimaginable level. He wasn't just protecting an alien fugitive. He was guarding the fate of entire worlds. We'll figure it out, he said, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. We have to. But even as he said the words, Gabe couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The cave was cold and damp, the echo of dripping water bouncing off the walls as Gabe and Anari sat in the dim glow of the hauler's headlights. Gabe had shut off the engine, allowing only the auxiliary power to keep the lights on. The silence inside the cave was suffocating, broken only by the distant rumble of the storm outside and the faint hum of the hovercraft still searching above. Gabe glanced at Anari, who leaned weakly against the side of the hauler. Her violet eyes were duller now, flickering with the same faint glow as before, but there was a palpable tension in the air between them. The reality of what she carried inside her weighed heavily on both of them. A biological weapon, Gabe repeated, his voice low and laced with disbelief. You mean this thing inside you can destroy entire species? Anari nodded, her expression grave. It wasn't always like this. I wasn't always like this. The weapon, what they call the catalyst, it was developed by the Council as a safeguard against rebellion and hostile species. It's a living organism that can adapt, infiltrate, and wipe out entire ecosystems with devastating precision. They wanted a way to control the galaxy, and they succeeded. Gabe felt a chill run down his spine. The enormity of the situation was starting to sink in, and it terrified him. How did it end up inside you? Anari hesitated, her violet eyes filled with sadness and guilt. I was part of the project, she admitted. I was one of their researchers, but I didn't know how far they'd go. When I realized what the catalyst was capable of, I tried to sabotage the program. But it was too late. The Council learned of my betrayal, and in a last-ditch effort to save the weapon from being destroyed, they implanted it inside me. Gabe stared at her, his mind racing. So you're saying you're the host for this? This catalyst? Yes, Anari whispered. It's bound to me now. My body keeps it contained, but if the Council captures me, they'll extract it. They'll use it to wipe out any species that opposes them. The weight of her words settled heavily on Gabe's shoulders. He had thought he was just helping a stranded alien, but this was something much bigger, something galaxy-shattering. He had never imagined he would be caught in the middle of a plot to weaponize an entire species, let alone carry the fate of billions in his hands. Anari's voice softened, almost pleading. That's why I ran. That's why they're hunting me. If they get their hands on me, it'll be the end for countless worlds. Gabe rubbed his temples, feeling the tension build in his skull. What do we do now? We can't keep running forever. Anari closed her eyes, her body trembling with exhaustion. The only option is to destroy the catalyst. But that means I have to die. The words hung in the air like a lead weight. Gabe's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected that. No, he said quickly. There has to be another way. Anari shook her head, her expression pained. There isn't. The catalyst is bound to my life force. As long as I'm alive, it stays intact. But if I die, it dies with me. It's the only way to stop it. Gabe felt a rush of anger and despair welling up inside him. He had risked everything to save her, only to be faced with an impossible choice. There's got to be something else. A way to extract it, or no, Anari interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. I've already tried. There's no way to remove it without triggering a catastrophic release. My death is the only way. Gabe stood up, pacing in the small space of the cave, his mind racing for answers. There had to be something. Anything. Before he could say another word, the cave's quiet was shattered by a sound that sent a chill down his spine, the low, mechanical hum of hovercraft engines. They were closing in again. Somehow, the Council's forces had tracked them to the cave. Anari tensed, her violet eyes widening in alarm. They're here. Gabe rushed to the hauler's controls, flipping on the scanner. Red blips appeared on the screen. 4 hovercrafts circling just above the cave, searching for a way in. The Council hadn't given up. They were closing in fast, and Gabe knew they were running out of time. He grabbed his blaster, checking its charge. We need to move. If they find us here, it's over. Anari struggled to stand, her legs trembling beneath her as she leaned on the side of the hauler for support. I don't have much strength left, she said, her voice strained. But I'll fight if I have to. Gabe wasn't sure how much fight either of them had left. But they couldn't just wait to be captured. He knew they had to act, and fast. Just as Gabe was about to move toward the cave entrance, the unmistakable sound of metal screeching against rock echoed through the cave. He turned just in time to see a dark figure drop down from the ceiling, landing with a grace that sent a shiver down his spine. The figure was humanoid, tall and covered in sleek black armor that shimmered in the dim light. A helmet obscured the face, but Gabe didn't need to see it to know who they were. This was no ordinary hunter. The figure straightened, and in the blink of an eye, a dark energy weapon was drawn, humming with deadly power. So, the figure said, their voice cold and metallic. You thought you could run. Gabe stepped forward, blaster raised, but the figure didn't flinch. Stay back, Gabe growled. We don't want trouble. The armored hunter chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. It's too late for that. The council wants what she's carrying, and you've just been in the way. Gabe's pulse raced as he stared down the hunter. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he couldn't just let them take on Ari. Not after everything. The hunter's weapon hummed louder as they stepped forward. Hand her over, and I'll make this quick. Anari, her breath ragged, moved to stand beside Gabe. Her voice was weak, but resolute. You don't know what you're dealing with. If you take me, if you extract the catalyst, you'll doom more than you can imagine. The hunter tilted their head, almost amused. The council is more than prepared to handle the catalyst. You think they don't have contingencies? Gabe gritted his teeth. He could see the hunter preparing to strike, and he knew they wouldn't survive a direct confrontation. Not like this. But then, something unexpected happened. Anari's body began to glow softly at first, then brighter, until the lines of energy running along her skin pulsed with radiant light. She looked at Gabe, her violet eyes filled with sorrow and determination. I'm sorry, Gabe, she whispered. But this is the only way. Before Gabe could react, Anari stepped forward, her form glowing brighter with every step. The hunter raised their weapon, but it was too late. Anari unleashed a wave of energy so powerful it knocked the hunter off their feet, sending them crashing into the cave wall. Gabe shielded his eyes as the light intensified, filling the entire cave with blinding brilliance. He could feel the force of it, the raw power emanating from Anari as she summoned every last ounce of her strength. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. Anari collapsed to the ground, her body limp and unmoving. Gabe rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. Anari. No. He knelt beside her, lifting her in his arms. Her eyes were closed, her skin cold and pale. The energy that had once pulsed through her was gone, and Gabe knew she was gone. The catalyst had died with her. The cave was eerily quiet now, the storm outside a distant rumble. The hunter lay unconscious against the wall, their weapons shattered beside them. But Gabe didn't care about the hunter. All he could focus on was the lifeless form in his arms. Anari had sacrificed herself to save them all. To stop the catalyst from falling into the wrong hands. Gabe sat there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had saved her once, only to lose her in the end. But she had made her choice. She had saved countless lives, even if it meant giving up her own. As the storm outside began to die down, Gabe gently laid Anari's body on the cave floor. He stood up, his hands shaking, and looked down at her one last time. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I wish I could have saved you. With a heavy heart, Gabe turned and walked toward the mouth of the cave. The storm had passed, but the Anari's war was over. And Gabe, now more than ever, knew he had to carry on. For her.